Hello and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. My name is Heath Jones, and if you're thrown off by me calling this the Northwood Podcast, if you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, just so you know, we have two audiences now. We have an online video audience and also a podcast audience, and so I'm recording this for both. And if you are watching on Facebook or on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel or follow our page. This will make it easier for you to be aware of events coming up or to find our videos as they are released, as you'll be notified each and every time we release another video if you subscribe. Or if you are listening to this in podcast form by way of whatever app you use to listen to podcasts, same thing. Please subscribe and or follow so that it'll be easier for you to find our content. But also, these points of engagement are supposed to drive traffic our way. Apple and Google and all these big tech companies, Facebook, they notice when you click on things and like things and subscribe to things, and they sometimes we'll recommend our channel or our pages to other people. And so please do that. It'll help us out and it'll help you out. I should also say that this podcast is made available by way of the All Indiana Podcast Network, which is made available by Wish TV, a local news station, Channel 8 here in Indianapolis. And if you're wanting to learn about more podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network, which means that they are produced right here in Indiana, you might type in www.wishtv.com/podcast, and you can find that page. Lastly, all of this is a production of Northwood Christian Church. I'm a pastor of Northwood Christian Church here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and if you'd like to learn more about our church, please feel free to check out our website, www.indYncc.org. That's www.indncc.org. And there you'll be able to find past sermons, if you like what you hear here today, and Bible studies, as well as information about our ministries and our service times and whatever you need to know about us. So I encourage you to check that out. Now, if you are listening to this as a podcast, then in this moment, you will likely be hearing an advertisement after these words. But if not, let's move along. Today's passage is found in Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. And it goes, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, 'This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them.' So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and the neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." The framing of this story, the beginning, reminds me of a story that a preacher once told me at a time when he visited today's equivalent of tax collectors and sinners. Jesus is visiting with tax collectors and sinners. Well, I've known others that have done similar things, and the preacher I'm remembering told a story from his prison ministry. He was invited to speak to a room full of prisoners, people that society has deemed worth putting in basically a cage. And the room was only full because the prisoners had nothing better to do. Some of them sat, arms crossed, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, bored, but again, what else are you going to do in prison? You go listen to a preacher. And the preacher noticed that each of them, as they were tuned out, they had tags sewn onto their shirts where you'd usually put a name tag, but instead of a name, each tag was inscribed with one word: felon. Just felon. Name tag, felon. And the preacher, trying to pull the crowd out of its stupor, it's being tuned out, said to them, addressed them directly, "I see that inscribed on your uniforms is the word felon, as if that were your name. I want you to know that is not who you are." And at this point, every eye turned to look at him. And in that moment, the preacher gave them a new name. He told them their true name and their true identity. You see, the preacher knew that we live up to the most affirming labels given us or down to the most degrading labels plastered onto us. And most often, whilst we are unawares that we are living into these labels, And in naming the deep worth of a person who has been reduced to a label like felon, the preacher called from inside them their truest self. And in that moment, the preacher saw the prisoner as God saw them, or at least in part. Put a pin in that. More on that in a second. We'll come back to the story, back to our text and tax collectors and sinners that Jesus is consorting with. This term, tax collector, is meant to emphasize just how compromised the sinners Jesus consorted with truly were. It's just a word, tax collector. We think of the IRS today, but back then they were considered as about as greedy or corrupt, generally speaking, as one could be. The worst of the worst. And the sort of tax collectors that Jesus is breaking bread with were especially no good in the eyes of the community. And the tip-off, how we know this, is by way of the Greek word translated as tax collector, which is telenes, of which the biblical scholar and preacher Barbara Reed writes, telenes were toll collectors in charge of indirect taxes, such as tolls, imports, customs, and tariffs. But what's more, they were responsible for raising their own salary, which is where we get into some trouble. One can easily see how this sort of system would be exploited. They were notorious, these tax collectors, for collecting tolls that were far above the requirements to cover the tax and their salary. And then they would pocket the difference, becoming exceedingly wealthy on the backs of their very own neighbors. And these people were, very understandably, despised. In the Talmud, Jewish reflections on the scriptures, collections of wise sayings, they would often pair these toll collectors with robbers, tax collectors and robbers, just say that, lump them all in together. So think about how base pickpockets are viewed in our culture or in any culture. The people that Jesus is consorting with here, eating with here, are those kinds of people times 50. And the point is to note that Jesus is breaking bread with the worst of the worst, not just outcasts or people who are poorly put upon, but outright bandits. This would be like you or I choosing to sit with the modern equivalent, crooks maybe who were responsible for the 2008 economic collapse, or any other con artist. You're sitting down with them to break bread. So it's no wonder that the religious leaders were scandalized. And I too would probably have my own questions. I would be wondering, so this guy is eating with these sinners, these tax collectors, maybe they're one of them. Maybe I shouldn't trust Jesus by association. I also should point out, by way of a quote from David Lose, what eating meant, sitting down and breaking bread meant in its culture. He writes, "Eating isn't catching a quick bite at the local coffee shop and moving on. Eating, that is, sharing table fellowship, is a mark of camaraderie, acceptance, and friendship. And so eating with tax collectors and sinners, Jesus is demonstrating a deep and abiding acceptance of those society has deemed beyond the pale." End quote. Which begs the question I alluded to a second ago. Is Jesus one of them? And what's his game? And maybe even, how dare he? How dare he consort with these people who perhaps have ripped you off that month? Would you consort with the likes of them? Some people are beyond the pale. Jesus answers the accusations that are hanging in the air with a series of parables. And today's parable is about a lost sheep and the shepherd's effort to find it. The choice of sheep as an analogy for the sinners he consorts with is telling. Sinners, like the tax collectors, are people who wantonly disregard the law and moral rightness. The sinners, as they were framed in my youth, as they were explained to me, were almost caricatures. Morally vacant, godless people, thumbing their noses at God because, well, that's just who they are. Sinner is a label, like felon is a label, with certain pejorative connotations. But Jesus, in using sheep as a stand-in for sinners, provides us a different way of viewing them, a way that might just break into empathy. For you see, sheep don't wander away on purpose. There's no deliberate thumbing the nose at the shepherd or, the metaphor for God. Sheep stray. That's just what they do. They munch on grass and they're with the other sheep and with their head down, and they fail to notice that they are the whole while chasing down greener pastures further and further away from the flock and the shepherd, isolating them still from community and safety. And the lostness sometimes is the sheep's fault, but sometimes it's not the sheep's fault. They do not always plan to leave the fold. And sometimes it just sort of happens. So perhaps the sheep was born into tragedy, or maybe just a bad pen with holes in the wall in a bad environment, or perhaps transformative life events sent them on a different path. Perhaps they hardly noticed that the choices they made in pursuit of these greener pastures led them far from where they wished to go from the onset. And so I can relate to these sheep. I'm describing my life in many ways at different times and seasons. But Jesus does not only challenge us to think of the sinners as sheep, giving them maybe some benefit of the doubt, but we are asked to make one more linguistic shift from sinner to the word lost. And here is not a valued judgment, this word lost. It's simply a fact. When you have been lost, did it make you a bad person? No. And it's sometimes important to note that in describing those categorized as sinners, as lost instead, allows us to throw down one label for a far more gracious one. Although in recent years, I feel like lost has also had some negative connotations dumped onto it. But for most of us, we can relate, because who among us have not been lost at one point or another? Even the righteous can be lost, and sometimes I am lost. Godly parents, in the midst of parenting challenges, can be lost. Otherwise moral people in the throes of, say, addiction, lost. Generous people in the midst of financial crisis, not greedy, lost. People in the midst of dead-end or dreaded jobs, endless cycles of long shifts and few days off, I've been there, lost. Definitely a feeling of lost. Might the senior who has a great pension plan but little sense of meaning since retirement be thought of as lost? Might the teen who works so hard to be perfect and who is willing to do just about anything to fit in be lost? Even if they find the way of fitting in, might still be lost. Might the earnest Christian who constantly is asking people whether they have accepted Jesus into their hearts be lost? Well, I think I've known a few. You get the idea. There are 1,000 ways to be lost. And framing sinners as lost instead gives an avenue to grace or understanding. And in our parable, the singular sheep is lost. And one can use your imagination to paint for yourself a picture of the sheep. And sheep are all, they're usually smelly. A sheep that has wandered off is going to be more that way, get dirty, get in the dirt, wander through some brambles. And the parable places the story in the wilderness, the wild places where the brambles grow with hot sun and is very dusty. And the sheep in this environment would become increasingly dirty and smelly, less desirable to hold with every passing hour. The sooner you find it, the better it will be for you, I guess, if you have to carry it back, because later it's going to get dirtier and dirtier. And this is what often happens the longer that you are lost. But then the shepherd leaves the 99. What gives now? In describing God as a shepherd who goes in search for the lost, wayward sheep, we get a window into the mind of Jesus, who views the quote-unquote sinners that he's breaking bread with as lost, but also worthy of seeking out. And this is why he breaks bread with them. He is actively living into this parable, seeking out those that are lost. They are so highly valued by the shepherd that the lost sheep is sought out whilst the other 99 are left behind. One of the great truths of this parable is that the lost sheep has as much value as those who are left in the fold. We often forget this when we speak of lost and found people. This means that you are as loved by God, you in the pew who seldom leave the fold, as those sinners that seem so irredeemable. Thieves, like the ones Jesus was eating with, worthy. Prostitutes, worthy. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, both worthy. And I'm not asking you to like it, but that's the implication. All of them, worthy, 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 and worthy. Because they, like we, have often found themselves to be lost. Sometimes they've been so busy munching grass and looking for greener pastures that they didn't even realize that they were lost. And God seeks them. And should they return to the fold, they will be restored. I know this is hard. Branding felons and sinners keeps them in those comfortable categories. It keeps us safe from the ways in which loving and forgiving makes us vulnerable when we let them back or close to us, vulnerable to more hurt and anxiety. This can even be more troubling when we recognize ourselves in the lost. To think that when we have wandered far from the fold, tarnished by the harsh terrain and separated from the community that had held us, that we were then pursued in love. When we would write ourselves off, that's almost too much. And what's more, to be found is to be found as you are. It isn't like the sheep gets all cleaned up and tidy before the shepherd visits upon the sheep to bring them back to the fold. The sheep is carried back as the sheep is. There is not value judgment in the word lost. It's just a simple fact. And one of the great truths of this parable is that the lost sheep has as much value as those who never left the fold. And we often forget this when we speak of the lost and found people, both kinds of sheep. Equally loved, insists this parable. And the response of the community is important to highlight because here we see what could happen when the lost and the found are brought together again, close and intimate. Even today, this is possible. And what happens in the parable is that the community is restored, so they all throw a party. They see the ways by which all of them benefit by the restoration of the lost sheep, and they are glad. Their lives are enriched by the return of the lost sheep. The text reads, when he has found it, the sheep, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven for one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Here is a picture of a wild, joyous response because the community has had a lost one return. And it's simple in theory to welcome back a lost sheep, but it isn't as easy as that. Issues of trust may come up. Resentments and angers may still bubble under the surface because of the harm that the lost sheep caused by their meandering ways. The reconciling work of restoring the lost sheep to the fold will be challenging from both directions, for those sheep who stayed in the fold as well as for those sheep that strayed. But when the lost one who comes home is truly transformed and restored to their community, the joy is felt throughout. Heaven comes down, and we taste the joy of God. The joy itself reveals God's love for us. Consider, when you felt as low and as unworthy as you've ever felt, when you found love again, if you haven't, you are loved. But if you've been in that moment and have come out and you found love again, heaven rejoiced at your finding. In the parable, the community rejoices in this same way. So here is a picture, an invitation, a picture meant to inspire us to participate in the joy of welcoming lost sheep home, creating a space for them and restoring them to their community. Attempts to heal old wounds, to comfort broken hearts. And if you can pull this off, it's no wonder they threw a party. A party is the inevitable result of relationships mended in this way. Just as all heaven and all the angels and God and all of creation rejoices for a sinner who repents and comes home, so does a small town when a parent overcomes an addiction, or a poor family is given some financial relief, or when a troubled teenager finds traction. When the least and the last are elevated, so too is the entire community. I've seen it. The more lost sheep to come home, the happier we'll all be. Joy for us all as many around us are restored to their community. That's the hope, that's the vision, that's what we strive towards. Two things to conclude. If you are in the fold, you're one of the ones who observes lost sheep, generally speaking. We've all been lost, but let's just say most of your time has been spent on the inside, watching others make one bad decision after another. Never forget that God loves them as fervently as God loves you. And they are more than the sin that we define them by, more than the labels that our culture and religious community slap onto them. They are lost, but not hopeless, and God will not give up on them. And if the church is a living embodiment of God's spirit and direction, then we can never give up on anyone. And when they're found, rejoice. No resentment, no old grudges, rejoice. And until then, in the meantime, long for their return and even seek them out. What does it look like for you to do your equivalent of what Jesus did, which is break bread with sinners and tax collectors, or today's equivalents? Second, back to our story, the one that I began telling about the preacher ministering in prison. So the preacher looks into the faces of the persons that had been labeled felon, right on their shirts, felon. And he said to them, "No, that is not who you are. I want you to know your true name. You are a saint." And they stared back, puzzled. A saint? No, surely not. The preacher then went on. "You have been made in the image of God, and somewhere inside you is the spark that may yet get fanned to flame, a transformative fire that when it has done its work, you will find that what is left is what was always there along, a saint. What is left is a saint which was always there below the surface. That is inside of you. Make no mistake. Your truest name," the preacher said to the prisoners, "your truest name is not felon. It is saint. Fill in your own name. So now, live into your true name." And if that preacher was correct, we are all really just saints who have lost their way, each of us. When some of those felons, quote unquote, lived into a new label, saint, the crowds went wild. When you named your deepest flaw to yourself and to God and began the long walk home, God threw a party. Those who understood the love of God when they heard the news couldn't help but laugh through tears of joy. So if you are lost, hold on. You will be found. God's efforts to find you are tireless and endless. The night does not last forever. You are loved by the God who knows you best. You may or may not have your life together, but you are worthy of love. You are worthy of the Good Shepherd's time and endless effort. As soon as you come to see yourself through this lens, through God's lens, you are, in a profound way, found. I think most of life's journey is just coming to see ourselves and others the way God sees us and others. But either way, you are worthy, and so is everyone else. God sees you for who you are and seeks you just the same. If God would take the time, what does that imply about the treasure buried deep in your chest that is pushing towards the light of day? So, child of God, precious treasure, lost yet sought after, sheep, saint, stand up and know your worth. Feel your worth from inside your bones. And now, when you are feeling more found than yesterday, heaven rejoices. Lost saint, welcome home. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.